21st. As well, we plan to do a survey. We'll be launching the online budget information tool, which you've seen in previous years. And we'll be doing a public information meeting as well towards the end of this, on November 29th. So there's a few things that we're planning to prepare as part of this engagement process. Let's Talk Squamish. We've got a project page that I mentioned there, and that's really going to be the hub of this engagement. That's where all the information about the budgeting process is going to live, as well as we'll be collecting feedback through a question and answer tool, an idea sharing tool, and we'll also have a survey that's hosted live on that platform as well. That survey will also be available in a hard copy format, so people can complete it if they prefer that way. And really, we're just looking to collect some feedback on some high-level priorities in that survey. As well, but as I mentioned, the online budget tool will go live in August, and that will allow people to explore the budget in more detail, and that will be updated as we move through this budgeting process with each of the budget workshops. We'll be preparing some explainers and infographics to help generate some interest in this process and provide a snapshot of some of the projects that are underway. As well, we'll be doing some social media posts, weekly ad in the newspaper, some digital ads, as well as featuring it in our e-news newsletter to help build awareness of the process and how people can participate and drive people towards that Let's Talk Squamish page as well. So as I mentioned, the survey, we're hoping to have it live in mid-August and run it through until mid-September. And our goal is to bring those preliminary survey results to council in mid-September for your review. And really, we're just trying to check in with the community on their high-level priorities as part of this budgeting process and gauge their satisfaction with current spending in key areas. So there's a number of ways that people can join in and participate in this engagement process around the budget. Of course, we're hoping people will follow along and participate on Let's Talk Squamish. They can ask questions, share ideas, and find information on that as the sort of the hub of this project. We'll be encouraging people to watch live or archived council budget discussions. Again, that survey will be a big piece of this, where they can complete that online or as a hard copy. We've got the budget feedback email address. We'll be monitoring, as we always do, the district's social media channels, looking for comments and conversations on there, as well as we'll be encouraging people to attend that public information event on November 29th. So that's kind of a quick overview, and we'd love to hear any questions or feedback from Mayor and Council. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Fordham. Council, do you have any questions? Councilor Race.
Thank you. I'm curious about the survey of community priorities. How would you tend to present that to the community? Is it kind of a blank slate, or we're thinking about doing this? What do you think of that? Could you sort of flesh that out for me a little bit, please?
Hi, good morning. I'll take that question. So we thought we'd do something similar to what we have done in previous years. We did not run a survey last year because we were launching the Let's Talk platform at this time, so we didn't have the resources to run a survey as well. But the prior 2 years, we ran a survey that received good feedback and a fairly reasonable response rate for budget engagement. The survey in 2020 for the survey, the dates are confusing. The survey that ran in 2019 for the 2020 budget, we received about 237 survey results. And then in 2020, for the 2021 budget, we received 251 survey results. And in those surveys, we asked questions, and I have a few examples here. So we listed a number of operational areas, service areas, and programs and initiatives, and asked the community to rank them in terms of how they would prioritize them in terms of their own priorities. So, for example, in the last survey we did, the top 10 results that people ranked were number 1, active transportation, number 2, water, sewer, wastewater, maintenance and replacement, 3, local business growth, new business attraction, number 4, climate adaptation mitigation, Number 5, emergency planning and mitigation. Number 6, fire rescue. Number 7, recreation. Number 8, arts, culture, and heritage. 9, local business resources and support. And then number 10, bylaw enforcement services. So from a long list of services, they selected their top 10. So that provided some feedback. We also asked questions like, if you could increase funding or fund one thing in the future year, what would that be? And as a trade-off, in order to balance the budget, if you, what would you decrease funding for? So that gave us, it was an open-ended question. It gave us quite a lot of insight in terms of where, again, where those priorities were. There's a few other types of questions we could ask, and we're definitely, we're keen to hear if council has any specific projects or areas that you would be interested in inquiring more about. Another type of question we asked previously was, if you had $100,000 to spend, how would you divide that? And the specific topic we asked was road safety. So how would you divide it between education, enforcement, and infrastructure like sidewalks and bike lanes? And we asked people to divide the 100,000 into percentages, essentially, to see where they wanted to see their money spent. So those are the kinds of questions we're thinking about. We're just in the early stages of development of the questions, open to feedback and ideas.
Thank you. No, that's very helpful. I was sort of, I guess, concerned that, I mean, most people, myself probably included, if it was just a simple question, your mind kind of goes to a pool addition or Brennan Park or a skating rink or something like that without getting into all of the other things that actually make the community work. So a broad range of questions like that and focusing people on the different areas, waste management and the things that aren't so sexy, I feel like I think that's helpful. That's sort of what I was looking for. Thank you.
Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. Through the chair, I was going to ask a similar question to Councillor Race. But I think one piece that is interesting or a little bit different from previous budgets is that we're contemplating using CAC dollars for the first time in a very directed way. And so I wonder if there should be some focus in the survey on some context there. Like, there isn't a huge amount of money because usually we secure the majority of our CACs as built affordable units, but there's a good amount of money there in the budget for the next 5 years, almost $8 million. So I wonder if we give people a little bit of a, it would be helpful for me at least to get some feedback in how people would like to see that money spent in their community, given that it's really meant to be beneficial across the board. More of a comment, I guess, than a question.
Anything else? Councillor Pettengill?
Yeah, I just was going to ask a similar question to Councillor Race as well, and just to reinforce the point that I think it is really valuable to frame our questions such that we're bringing the larger context and the trade-offs, and would encourage us as we do that to think, not just next year, if we do this, what do we pull back on, but how do you see this helping us in 10 years with the other things we have to balance, so that the sort of longer term big picture thinking that we have to balance as a council and as a community, just making sure that those are coming across in the survey. So it's not sort of a, one-off ad hoc things that, aren't really necessarily very feasible without looking at the big picture. So having that context, I think is great in the questions. And I really appreciate the questions you spoke about. Thank you.
We'll go to Councillor Herford and then Councillor Race.
Thank you. How is there an ideal sort of number of questions or amount of time that you sort of predict that someone would spend filling out the questionnaire? So I'm just sort of curious how, like, what's the target number, or is it time spent, and is what's the rationale there?
I don't know if we have a set time that we would be looking for, but I can say that we do aim to have shorter the better generally, but you got to balance that with the type of information that we're trying to collect. We really do focus on writing these surveys with really plain and simple language so that people can get through them as quickly as they can and understand them as well as they can. Certainly, there's a drop off with surveys when people, the longer they get and the more complicated long answer questions there are as well. So we would be looking to find a balance between collecting information that is useful to the decisions you're making and making sure that we get as much feedback as we can.
Thank you. And then on the same sort of line, what process maybe could you provide a little bit of context around the process that you use with your team to sort of vet the questions themselves and the topics you're going to focus on? Because we're going to spend quite a bit of time on budget as a council asking lots of questions and getting lots of answers. So I'm curious how staff boils that down to that condensed, simple version and just what that process looks like from here.
For past surveys, really, we've just sort of shared it amongst our team and done an internal review and asked people to read it and just raise any issues that they might understand or might flag. We do, and if possible, try to ask ourselves, would someone at a grade 5 or 6 reading level understand the questions? It's not always possible given the context of what we're asking in some cases, but that's sort of the frame of question that we ask ourselves when we're looking through it. So we do review it between multiple people on our team. And with this survey, we could probably share that even larger among more district staff and try and get a little bit more feedback before we go live.
Okay, I'd like to wrap up, so I'll go to you, Councillor Race.
Thank you. And this is just on the engagement generally. Well, for example, there's a paragraph in our report with the endorsement of the district's asset management plan in anticipation of the redeveloped long-term capital plan. Staff recommend changing methodologies from a hybrid direct tax and reserve funded capital program to a long-term reserve funded program to align with the asset management plan and long-term financial planning methodologies. So I'm hoping that staff will be able to explain that to me a little later on this morning. But that kind of thing, do we try to explain that to the public? And the other component of that is recently there's been a number of different letters and postings and so forth on various websites and stuff that raise issues and contain a lot of misinformation from my perspective. And I'm wondering if we try to deal with that. I mean, some of the things that were posted actually stunned me that people could be that out of touch with what's actually happening. And I'm wondering if we try to use the budget process to somehow correct that. And so for just one example is people talk about development paying for certain things and development should fund this and development should fund that. And so they forget about things like DCCs and they forget about things like CACs. And is that something to remind people of? Is this to let them know that a lot of the things that you see being built around here are not funded by taxation? They're funded from these other sources. Is this an opportunity to kind of engage in that?
Through the chair, absolutely. Yes, thanks for the question. And I think that, part of this and one of the goals that we set that Mr. Fordham mentioned at the beginning was to inform and educate around the planning process. I think part of that is a big, what we've worked really hard to do this past several months within our team is really try to break it down to the simplest form. And we use social media a lot to reach to a wide audience with simple graphics, simple definitions. We've been using slideshows and then linking to much more detailed information on our websites or website. We found that to be effective. We're creating, the district channels are the source of truth. We keep focusing that, bringing people to our sites. We find that we are getting shares across a variety, a variety of topics. And so I think with the budget, that's absolutely something we can work towards. We've made some notes from the various items that you flagged today in terms of areas that could need more definition. And so we'll work on that for sure. We've already, Sandra Koenig, our web and graphics technician, has been working on some graphics already. So we'll begin the process this week with some of that early education and in a simplified form.
Thanks. I'll just add a comment at the end that I think both on the Let's Talk page and at the end of the survey, it's a chance to send people to, like, did you know there's a real estate and facilities master plan, an integrated flood hazard management plan, a community climate action plan? Like, I get a lot of comments and people are like, you're not working on these things. And it's a great opportunity to say, yes, we are, and we have a great plan. So it would be great to just at least provide people a pathway if they want to explore more. And I think taking a just-in-time learning approach to, our pages and infographics, so that, you can click on a little link and it gives you a definition of DCCs or CACs so that people can choose to connect or not, because we don't want to overwhelm them with information. But I do think it's an opportunity to point them in the direction of the fact that there are a lot of really clear pathways to having things built here and addressing big issues. And lots of people don't know that yet. All right, thanks very much. So now we'll move on to the first look at the capital plan, which is funded by reserves and DCCs and grants.
Thanks. Pardon me. Thank you. Just wanted to put up this slide as a reminder of the timeline that we introduced at the June 28th budget kickoff meeting. So you'll note we're on July 26th, there's capital, but also that we have an opportunity to revisit the capital on September 27th, where we're going to bring back the special operating project as well as the capital, and then those reserve continuity schedules, which will show how things are funded from the reserve side of things. Just another reminder from the budget kickoff meeting in June, the focus today will be on the overall five-year plan, five-year capital plan, sorry, which aligns with the best practice of long-term planning focus as opposed to the short-term annual focus of the past. So for the most effective and efficient use of council's time, staff will focus on highlighting changes and additions to the capital plan, so the prior five-year plan. And although the entire list of the capital plan has been included in your package, we've also included two supporting documents, which is the new capital projects and the changes to existing capital projects. And that's just to direct the focus on those, what that's changed and what's new. So in terms of the schedules and what they highlight the changes in scope of a project, changes in budget, changes in funding, and any new projects. And just a reminder as well that another reminder that we do have the budget managers online if there's any questions when we get to that point. Right, so the capital funding methodology recommendation, I will do my best to explain this. So in support of the recently endorsed asset management plan and the upcoming long-term capital plan, and that's to incorporate the asset management plan, which was endorsed in June. The phase 2 of that piece was to incorporate that into our current long-term financial plan, which is much more robust and much more detailed. So staff are recommending a methodology change for capital going forward. So currently, when external funding is not available, the district is utilizing a partial reserve and partial direct tax capital funding methodology. and that is supported by borrowing for the larger investments. So just to back up on the reasoning behind this is that reserves play a critical role in asset management and long-term planning, and are used to systematically set aside funds for the future investment, which is designed by the asset management plan and the long-term financial plan. So utilizing a hybrid tax and a reserve funding methodology exposes the district's capital asset management program to fluctuations in tax pressures from other initiatives in favor of reducing taxes or funding some other initiative in any given year. So although oftentimes smaller impacts largely go unnoticed in the short term, they can build over time, resulting towards a shift in over-reliance on borrowing. Again, it's over time. And also can have much larger impacts when there's been several deferrals to the capital program, which can create large-scale backlogs in capital investment. So as an example, the district is currently facing this right now with the facilities investments. So it's several years of lack of investment in favor of reduction in tax, and then you have this bottleneck of critical facilities to invest in. So staff are therefore recommending, along with a longer-term best practice, that the district shift the long-term reserve funded program and which will be informed by the asset management and incorporates all elements of capital and the upcoming long-term capital plan update.
I'm not sure he's convinced. Do you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So listening to that, then what this seems to be is a method of just kind of leveling out the burden from year to year, as opposed to having spikes, because reserves, not entirely, but significantly are funded from direct taxation over the years. And so if we set up an amount in a budget to contribute to reserves, like this is forced saving, that fixes the tax hit for that year for capital projects. And we're not going to leave it open to spikes for some particular project that comes along. Is that sort of where this is all going to?
Through the mayor, yes, exactly how this is going. So the idea is that the asset management incorporates all of the capital necessary, the program, and then it creates a systematic approach towards contributing to the reserves so that we have that every year same or somewhat depends on how the program works, but that it's anticipated taxation contribution to the reserve. So it's that systematic approach, and then it takes away from influxes when there's larger investment requirements because you have this capital program over the long term. So each year you're putting away your contribution to the reserve and you're managing the program over a long term. And you can do sort of a revolving 3-year spike or 4-year spike, meaning that the smoothness of the program will anticipate spikes in the investment because it actually has anticipated those investments.
So I don't want to get into too much detail in the operating budget right now, but in past years, we've had a special projects line, which has been capital projects of a relatively small number compared to some of the bigger projects. And even though there are a series of one-offs, there's kind of a reoccurring amount, more or less. Is that the kind of thing that would be covered by this? Or would that kind of thing continue and we just have a line item contribution to reserve X million dollars a year?
Through the mayor, great question. The special operating projects are separate. So operating projects are different. This will, and that will continue down the same program. The capital is where we're looking at, and that is the contributions. You can anticipate capital through all of our asset management, our various master plans, in a way that allows us to think of 5 to 10 years longer term and save that money. Whereas the special operating projects are more annual in nature, or can be looking a bit further out, but they're not based in infrastructure need.
Thank you.
All right, so moving on. So before I pass it over to Mr. Russell, I did want to provide a kudos to commend him and the team on the enormous amount of effort and work that's been put into producing this capital budget on this very ambitious schedule, all the while juggling the new budget software system implementation. It's been a heavy lift. So thank you. Also, I wanted to commend the budget managers who have made significant efforts in reprioritizing a number of the capital projects to reduce pressures as a result of inflation, as well as the result of our significant facilities investment, and ultimately delivering a net neutral 2023 capital budget. So with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Russell to walk us through some of the highlights.
Good morning. Good morning, Mayor and members of council. My name is Roland Russell, Senior Financial Analyst for Budgeting and Planning. Thank you very much, Ms. Boxrud. No further ado, we'll just jump right in. We're going to talk first about new capital additions, and these are just some highlights that are placed on the board ahead of you there. Sorry, whatever you want to call that, overhead. And what I've done is just selected the larger projects in any given year to give a flavor for the types of things that are coming towards us. So next year, you will see that we're investing in Brenham Park, both playgrounds and tennis courts. The year after, we've applied for and hope to be receiving a major grant from Clean BC. That would be a $17 million project to further revitalize Brenham Park. After that, we're looking at some stormwater management system improvements to the tune of around $7 million. And then in 2026, work would commence on the new landfill site expansion. That project is a $27 million project. And then the last significant item that we wanted to highlight is in 26, we're going to start building a new landfill. And in 27, we're going to start working on closing the existing landfill. And both of those are targeted for the new landfill to be open in 2028 and therefore the existing landfill to be closed at or about the same time. The other highlight of note with respect to new capital is that this year, for the first time, we're using CACs as an integral part of our funding mechanism for our capital plan. So we're using CACs, and as part of our philosophy from a finance and operational standpoint, we're trying to restrict or where we're using CACs so that we can get the most bang for the buck, so to speak. And this year, at this point, we're using to fund parks and recreation. You'll note in your package that there's a significant use of CACs associated with Brenham Park revitalization, Clean BC grant, $4.7 million. That is a placeholder because, as with all grants, you apply years in advance. And if we get the grant, then we would endeavor to use CACs, but we would probably have to use CACs in some combination with other financing because at this point in time, we don't actually have quite as much CACs as are indicated in the overall budget. Slide, please. Want to highlight some changes to existing capital projects. And probably the major part that we want to identify here, there's a half dozen major capital projects that are underway currently. If you look at all of these projects, none of them are brand new, okay, in 2023. They're all existing projects. Those 6 projects make up 50 million of the $70 million capital plan in 2023. So this is the focus of our work. This is where we're spending our money, and these are the things we're trying to get done. Okay, and so we're hoping from a council perspective and from the perspective of the general public that they see that, you know, we've got some really big and important things going on here. Facilities, you know, necessary upgrades to both water and wastewater, and also, you know, protection from the elements by improving our diking. So this is where our focus is on the capital plan. Yes, there are $20 million worth of other capital items, but this is really the nuts and bolts of what we're trying to do. The last piece I'd like to emphasize is we've made some changes to existing capital projects, and these changes have been made in an attempt to reduce future pressures on our cost structures, and also uh, to realign our capital plan to ensure that we are meshing appropriately and collaborating within departments so that projects are undertaken in a way that they fit well together with each other. So other things we'd like to note is active transportation. There are some external funding opportunities. We've asked that those be delayed till 2024. The rationale is that currently our funding for active transportation runs out after 2023. And at this point in time, there's been no announcements as to a replacement fund for community works. So we're trying to bridge the gap till we find a resolution to add more money to allow us to maintain that program. We've used CACs against the Valley Cliff Fire Hall, and that was done in an attempt to manage the total amount of debt that we would have to undertake and thereby lower the tax impact in future years. We've incorporated projects into the first revitalization grant that we've got. So in the original plan for 2022 and 23, we had a number of additional projects that were being undertaken at Brennan Park. Those have now been incorporated into the grant. So that's reduced the overall capital plan. We're coordinating the timing of the cemetery project with the master plan release. So that's required delay of the plan by approximately a year. There's coordination of items going on at the Public Works site between Public Works and wastewater treatment plant. And again, that's just to ensure that we're making the best use of our project dollars and trying to get everything done in a timely manner. There's been a delay to Pioneer Way Extension. It is determined that we could put that off a little bit. Then I'll let our engineers explain the rest of the nuances to that. We've delayed the roof replacements on 3 different buildings that were earlier in the plan on the basis that our facilities and construction people, along with our facilities maintenance people, have been able to review those structures and determine that they can be repaired over the short term. And then we've also extended the water metering project to complete the ICI. That would be institutional, commercial, and industrial installs. And that's extending that out over 23 and 24 to complete that project, as we're now facing the more complex items for water metering, for commercial water metering. So these are things that we've done to reduce pressures and reduce the overall impact of our capital plan on the short term, just try to better coordinate things. Lastly, this is what our financing picture looks like over both the short term and the longer term. As you will note, you know, we like to emphasize that we are using development and development dollars to fund our capital plan. And you'll note there that there's probably 10 to 12% of the total capital plan is funded externally from developers. And that, in conjunction with grants, produces approximately, on a longer term basis, approximately 1/3 of our capital plan financing is from external sources. And that leaves roughly 2/3 from internal. And that's, give or take, a relatively even split between district reserves, and debentures. Because of the nature of what we're looking at and the sheer size of some of the projects that we're taking on, that debenture ask is particularly high at this point in time. We're hoping that as we move forward over time, we will manage that blip, let's say, of facilities and be able to lower our overall debenture borrowing and put greater emphasis on district reserves and external financing as we move forward. That is the end of my portion of the presentation, and be happy to engage in discussion and feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Council, we are going to get another look at the capital plan in the fall, but any initial questions? I'll just come this way, starting with Council Race.
Thank you. I had two questions. One is with respect to the CACs. Last term, my recollection is we actually embedded it in policy that we would put a high percentage, and once again, my recollection is somewhere around 75% of the CACs towards housing and housing initiatives. And we seem to have eased out of that. I personally don't recall a specific step that we took away from it. But I'm wondering, and I'm not objecting to what staff propose, I'm just wondering as a matter of process, do we intend to kind of visit that as a policy? Or is that just kind of from year to year, we will sort of focus those funds and more or less embody it in budget decisions?
Through the mayor, we have a specific reserve identified as the Affordable Housing Reserve. And the district continues to put money into that reserve based on the results of negotiations undertaken by planning with respect to our development. So where there are shortfalls in the provision of affordable housing, then the dollars associated with that are directed specifically to the Affordable Housing Reserve. And the Affordable Housing Reserve is not part of the CAC process that we're referring to here. These CACs that we're referring to here that are being used to support recreation projects are general CACs that are not assigned to specific areas. So we're not shorting affordable housing per se. If there are affordable housing requirements and we're receiving funding, those go into a different bucket.
Well, my recollection was that a CAC was a CAC when it left the hands of the developer. And what we were, and this goes back to last term, doing with them is putting some money into affordable housing and some money into, I think it was recreation and public amenities and so forth, but a relatively small portion of it. So from my perspective, this reflects a change because we do have the Affordable Housing Reserve. I understand that. But it seems to me that what we're saying is that the CAC funding will, at least from this moment on, go into recreation as opposed to the Affordable Housing Reserve. I'm not sure how that particular reserve would get any funding in the future. I mean, planning, I guess, can try to, if they're negotiating with a developer, they can try to say, okay, you're going to contribute X dollars to this and X dollars to that. I'm not sure our CAC policy does that. We're kind of just going through a renewal of that anyway, and we maybe have to identify that. So we have two CACs in effect. But I'm just, and it's maybe a bigger discussion than today, but I just want to sort of, at some point, I think we have to clarify our policy around that and what our practice is. And when a dollar leaves a developer and comes to us, what portion goes into affordable housing and what portion goes somewhere else?
I'm going to have Ms. Glenday respond to that because I think we have been accounting for this properly, and the funds we're seeing here are the ones that are set aside for this use.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. I'd like to try and provide some clarity. If I do misrepresent, I'll look to finance to correct me. The CAC funds that staff are referring to in terms of funding the projects in this capital plan are funds that are already in the district's reserves. So the Affordable Housing Reserve and then the General CAC Fund. Staff did look at the current policy to ensure that anything in this current financial plan where we're recommending using funds that exist that are currently in the district's bank account, so to speak, will be applied according to the current policy. This does not affect where monies coming in the future go. That current policy and our updated policy will determine that. So I hope that that provides some clarity.
Okay, can we move on?
Yeah, I had a second question. So the second question is with respect to Brennan Park and the library, which on our capital plan and facilities replacement is after the fire halls, after public works. And there's this, we've kind of gone out to the public and said there's this broad band of projects, which includes Brennan Park. And Brennan Park, we studied, I guess, once again last term, and there was 4 stages to that, not necessarily in any particular order. And that I understand is also just being reviewed right now. The library has done its needs assessment and is just kind of waiting for something to happen to replace the existing building. And neither of them are in the 5-year plan. I mean, Brennan Park is mentioned certainly with the expenditure of the grant that was recently announced. But the other things, second ice rink, expansion of the pool, et cetera, are not mentioned there. And so these are, from my perspective, seem to be particularly grant funded. They're not going to show up in a financial plan unless there is some external funding associated with that. And so I guess part of it is conveying that to the public, that we haven't forgotten about the rest of Brennan Park and the library. But the second part of it is what we as the district does, and it's maybe a slightly different conversation with different people on staff, but what we as the district do to get these projects to the point where you hear the expression shovel ready. Some grants want some real particulars of what the project is. And I look at the library, for example, now that I'm on the library board, and the library has a needs assessment, but there's still some site location issues that hasn't been decided. And there's some questions around how it might co-locate or become a people hub or a community hub. So from my perspective, those are all things that we would try to decide before we apply for a grant, or might be necessary to decide before we apply for a grant. And so I guess I'm hoping then that, as I say, it's a bigger question than just finance. I'm hoping that the work continues on these things to identify these and sort of focus the vision for what we're actually aiming for, so that if something comes along and there's an election and money starts leaving the doors of senior governments, that we're ready to go with some of these projects. And just because it's not on the 5-year financial plan doesn't mean they've been put off into Never Never Land. It's partly comment, partly question, I guess.
Through the chair, I think the easiest way to answer that is no, they're not in Never Never Land. They are not in the plan today. And I think that the rationale for them not being in the plan today is twofold. One, these projects are anticipated, but they're also anticipated for the latter stages of this plan, so potentially 27 or 28. Part 1, part 2, they are definitely going to be projects that will require additional external funding sources. So over and above just what the district puts in, we're going to be looking to receive other types of funding. And there's a lot of work right now that's being done on the ground by staff determining exactly what these projects need to look like and what the community wants with respect to a new library community hub facility, what that might look like to meet the library's future needs, what types of projects at Brennan Park the public are looking for. And we can't really draft those or design those projects out until we do that legwork. And so right now in 2022, we're doing that legwork to figure out what these projects should look like. And then what we're anticipating is that a year from now, when you see the next plan, those projects will be included because we will now know what the community is looking for and be able to appropriately cost those projects and insert them in the plan at that point, rather than us kind of guessing what we think might be required. We're trying to, figure out what the community wants and then be able to put those specific projects into the plan. And so we're anticipating that in the 24 through 28 financial plan, you will see some additional large projects coming in towards the end.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Herford, this item is on the agenda till 9:30. So if everyone could just be concise, that would be great.
Challenge accepted. The CAC, actually, I'll start with thank you for this package was very comprehensive, although I was optimistic when I saw our agenda was 25 pages, but there's some very dense pages in there with lots of information. And I really appreciate the last, the capital project budget package guide, last few pages I found was really useful. And I think the community is going to benefit from that information being attached. I understand through budgeting, we're looking at how we're spending money. I'm curious on what assumptions are being made on the revenue anticipation that will be associated coming from CACs. So we're talking about spending money that we have, but we're also must be projecting some coming in. And I'm just curious what assumptions or methodology was used for that side of this equation.
I'm going to say that projections of CACs is not an exact science. So we're looking at what types of development are coming, what's in the pipeline right now, and projecting out what level of CACs we might receive from those developments. But we don't have a lot of history in doing this, let's say. So we're not quite as proficient as we might be with respect to some other sources of developer type financing. So we're probably looking out 2 to 3 years and able to give a reasonably good idea what we think will be coming through the door. But, that's one of the reasons that you're not seeing a full package with all the various continuity schedules for these reserves today, because we do need to do a little more work around putting that package together, and we'll be bringing that back to you in September. Okay, I hope that addresses your issue.
I suppose my comment on that is just a concern at some point, the level of development has to ease off for any number of reasons. And so I appreciate the new methodology around the funding and avoiding spikes and asset management and so on. And I just want to make sure that that staff's conscious of, and I'm sure you are, that when sort of the throttle lifts on development, we don't end up in a different but similar pinch with these funds. And how is that sort of sitting?
We're definitely concerned, I think, would be the short answer. We recognize with interest rates increasing, there's going to be more pressure on development. And so at some point it will slow down. And that makes this whole DCC, CAC projection issue that much more difficult, let's say. So we're trying to err on the side of caution as opposed to being overly optimistic.
Thank you. I noticed one of your last slides around spending the DCCs. Almost 50% of the DCCs were spent in the first year of the five. Did I read that correctly? And if so, what's happening there?
You did, and the rationale is that we have a very significant project, which is DCC funded. That's the wastewater treatment plant expansion. So we're using approximately $10 million plus in DCC financing for that single project.
And then thank you very much. And then the last question I have is, I'm noticing some fleet things coming in the next few years that aren't EV specific, where I think there's direction to go that way. And I know this is something that's a thought that's happening, but I'm curious about maybe increasing those placeholder amounts, because if that is available at that time, it's likely to be more expensive. So we're positioned correctly for that. And so what's happening in that space in general, I guess?
Well, two pieces. I'll take the front half of this question, and I see that Mr. Tremblay is on the line. I'll let him take the second half. We do have a project in the plan for 2023 to review the overall fleet financing model, and we're anticipating that will incorporate the cost structures around electric vehicles. And that's where I'm going to say from us doing our homework, so to speak, and then what will come out of that, I anticipate, will be new and different costing. As far as the actual logistics of purchasing EVs, etc., I'll leave that for Mr. Tremblay.
Hello. Through the chair, yeah, to answer your question, we basically review it every year. We put a placeholder going out, 2 or 3 years where our replacement life cycles are. And then we review it every year to see where we're at with technology. So if it's available, if it's tried and ready to go, and then we can make that decision. So depending on what size it is, what's out there, there's some newer stuff that's coming out right now, especially in the smaller excavating type of equipment. So like I say, we just review it on a yearly basis.
Council did pass a motion last year. Yeah. So we'll see that in the next round of budgets. But the climate lens is supposed to be put across the fleet master plan. Council Pattengill.
Yeah, thanks. The slide, I can't remember the title, but something changes to the capital plan. I just want to make sure I understood the number. So one example was the Tantalus Fire Hall at 8 million. I just want to check that 8 million, is that we're doing 8 million of the total project value this year, $8 million of work, or is that saying the total project cost changed by 8 million, or just what does that $8 million number mean?
The $8 million represents the budget in 2023 for the Tantalus Fire Hall. The total budget for the Tantalus Fire Hall is $15.8 million, and we've already started spending on that. So $8 million next year, and some this year, and then more in 2024.
Okay, thanks. And the last item, I was going to ask a question, but in the interest of time, I'll just leave a comment and similar to the one about the fleet plan and EVs. So when we had the discussion about our municipal energy and emissions plan and climate action plan and so on, my understanding or recollection was that we're going to focus on Brennan Park. The HVAC at the RCMP might use high efficiency gas, but then some of the other ones like at the 55 and so on, that was going to be electric and heat pumps and so on. And when I was reading through some of the detail, I saw Fortis's name a few times, and that makes me very nervous in terms of greenwashing what we're actually doing. So I just want to highlight what we've talked about with the MEEP and the climate emergency and all those things, and maybe we can dig into this into September. But my hope is that we are not putting replacement gas infrastructure. Recognizing we did talk about RCMP specifically, and that might be an exception, but the other ones might be something to have a discussion about. Maybe I just misunderstood or misread the detail there, but something for September maybe. Thank you.
Councillor Stoner, do you have any questions?
Thank you, through the chair. My first question is with regards to our debt borrowing limit. And I'm curious if when we borrow for the utilities, so the big number for the solid waste landfill expansion, does that impact our debt borrowing limit as a district as a whole?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question was around the CAC list of priorities. And so appreciate that what we're looking at is the amount that has been earmarked for kind of cash in lieu of critical amenities. In our current CAC policy, there's also an amount that we get for specifically for active transportation in parks. And I'm curious if what we're looking at here is the total of both, or if it's just one or the other.
The portion that you're looking at here is the general component. If there are specific elements for active transportation or parks, those would be segregated.
Okay, so from that perspective, I am curious at what lenses we use to identify which projects were being prioritized for the CAC spending, given that there's another fund for parks, and then all of the projects that have come forward are parks and recreation related.
The amount in the parks fund currently is limited. Let's say already spent, limited.
Okay, I will leave that for comments. Those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Can you just add your comment?
So my comment on that is that I think that list of priority projects for the CACs needs a little bit of reconsideration, just in terms of balancing a little bit more where the benefit is going to, given that they're all recreation and outdoor focused. I think cash in lieu of critical amenities, for me, should be a little bit more balanced in terms of who's receiving that benefit. And so when I saw that initial list, there are a few other things that jumped out at me. I also don't think it's fully in line with the priorities set out in the Brennan Park Parks and Recreation Master Plan in terms of the short-term priorities there. Some other projects have been advanced in it, as well as the park at the end of No Name Road. I'm not sure how we prioritize that, given that it's not in our parks master plan either. And so some further detail there for me when this comes back would be helpful. Thank you.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. Regarding the new tennis courts that staff proposed to fund through CAC, has staff identified the site or sites for new courts?
I believe that those courts, the expansion of the new court.
No, that's through the chair. First year, the rehab is at Boulevard Courts. And then in year 2, there would be rehab and expansion of the courts at Brennan Park.
Okay, and so then that takes me to the Eagle Wind situation. What budget category does the future of the courts at Eagle Wind fall under? There's no mention of those courts in this capital plan that I noticed. So when in the budget process will we hear about that particular project?
Through the chair, we would need to come back to that in terms of purely in terms of capacity. It would be 2024 at the earliest we would be able to get to that project. So the plan is replace the pickleball courts next year, and then the year after we could look at rehab of those courts to another use. I mean, we simply don't have the capacity to take on 4 projects in pickleball and tennis in 2023.
Councillor Anderson. I will. We had a pavement management study done, and I wonder how up to date it is now, or whether it is aging.
Good morning. Through the chair, my name is Jesse Morwood. I'm the Capital Projects Manager. I believe we did the paving master plan about 4 years ago. It is still relevant. It was always a guideline. So we follow it as in general terms. It really helped develop the long-term budget for the paving master plan. Regarding the specific sites, it's evolving the longer we go from the original time that it was developed, the less relevant it will be. It still very much is a good planning tool. We still use it and will for the foreseeable future. Thank you.
So it will help inform the asset management plan and sort of the timing of roads when we do timing of pipes under the ground. It's still relevant from that perspective.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Well, we try and time the replacement of pipes with also the need for roads to be repaired or redone. And we're doing the asset management plan and a longer capital plan. So I wanted to make sure that the paving master plan was still relevant and is informing all that work so that we're timing projects appropriately.
Yes, thank you for the question. Very much so. That's tends to be where we deviate the program a little bit. Sometimes we accelerate the paving if we're doing underground work, underground water work. For example, Reed, we're doing Reed this year, and then we're going to do the paving on Reed next year. So we do try to combine the two asset management projects, but that also can adjust the schedule for the paving a little bit, which is why it's a guide and not hard set schedule.
Thank you. There were two projects on here. One spoke to the water reservoir design delays, and the other one was the water meter installations have an increase in complexity. I'm very curious about what is increasing in terms of complexity for the water meter installation.
Thank you for the question. Regarding the complexity is there was a long list of water meters that installations that need to happen. Some of the more complicated, expensive portions of that have just been delayed because we were trying to get the low-hanging fruit. We do have a plan now to address the more challenging installations. That's planned to be done over the next few years, which is what the budget reflects. Thank you.
There's a project in here to replace the Headworks building at the Public Works Yard, and it talks about the screening, grit removal, blower room, and then it talks about offices, lab, operator change room, lunchroom, showers. But I would assume all that would be going into the new Public Works building. And so I'm wondering what exactly we're replacing in terms of this building, and if anyone can answer that. I know Mr. Story's on the line, but he might. Mr. Kinushenko just popped up on my screen.
Sure, I'll take a stab at it.
We can't hear you very well, Ben.
Okay, I'll try to speak up. My name is Ben Kinushenko.
No, we can't hear you. Cal's on the line too.
Through the mayor, my name is David Rolston. I'm the manager of municipal infrastructure. I can't speak to the public works facility and what portion of components of the Headworks building can be incorporated into that new facility, but I can say that the Headworks, the reason for the replacement of that building is due to work that was done as part of the ongoing wastewater treatment plant design. And so there was a seismic assessment as well as a condition assessment, and the combination of those two things is what is leading to the need to replace the Headworks building.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the scope of the project to replacing lunchrooms and change rooms. So that's some clarity when we come back would be great. Oh, Mr. Bragg?
Yes, hi. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I need to dive into this one. It's a valid question. It should be part of the major project for Public Works facility itself. So I need to dive in a little bit further to see if we have any wires crossed here.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Bragg. And I guess my last comment is that we passed a motion last year during the budget process that an equity, inclusion, and diversity lens be considered regarding expansion and creation of parks, transit infrastructure improvements, and transportation system improvements. So in regards to Councillor Stoner's question about No Name Road, that is an area that has higher density and is underserved by parks. So I just want to make sure that that motion has been carried through this budget process, whether for capital, special projects, that sort of thing.
Sorry, through the chair. Yes, I believe so. And No Name Road is one of the priority project. Well, not. There are a number of replacements of or upgrades of parks in existing residential areas, and North Yards is one of them. So it is consistent with the Parks and Rec master plan, in our opinion.
Thanks. Okay.
Thank you. When we're talking about the paving master plan, it just sort of jogged a memory for me, which was that it was setting aside, obviously that is a tool that creates a budget ask, but we're paving the road with pavement, not with funds. And I feel like we're getting less pavement for the money. So how are we looking at those cost escalations with these master plans? Because I'm seeing a lot of stationary numbers sort of in general, but we'll use the paving as an example of this.
Through the mayor, thanks for the question. Yes, we are seeing escalation in prices with inflationary, specifically with paving and others. We did have that conversation as part of the budget process this year. We are anticipating raising the numbers in the future. I believe we may have done it longer term for the paving, but we were certainly for next year trying to have a net zero change in the budget, and so that's why it's flat for next year. As a result, we will get less quantity done next year than we would have this year, for example.
All right, thank you. So the motion on the agenda is that the District of Squamish include the capital projects presented in this report in the 2023 to 2027 financial plan. Moved by Council Race, second by Council French. Any last comments? Staff have recorded your questions and your comments, so we'll get that clarity when it comes back to us in the fall. Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Council motion to close. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor Race. Any opposed? Motion carries. So we'll take about 15 minutes now.